I want to tell you a story about how a small, stubborn mistake can pull a secret thread and the whole world starts to unravel. You ever chase a little problem? Just a squeaky hinge, a missed payment, a pig loose in the yard, only to find out it was never little at all? That was Clementine Ross's morning. Dawn still blue around the edges, the smell of coffee not yet strong enough to fight the chill, and Bessie, her family's prize hog, had punched straight through a slat in the pen like she owned the valley. Clementine called softly, half whisper, half prayer. No answer but the drip of dew and a crow's lazy jeer from the cottonwood. She glanced back at the house. Through the window she could see the square shoulders of her father, Amos, hunched over the kitchen table, bills fanned out like losing cards. The bank had circled a date on a piece of paper, and dates like that sit in a house like a loaded gun. You feel it whether you look at it or not. She pulled on her worn boots. Maybe you've done that too, stepped out before anyone could tell you to stop. The hills behind their fence weren't exactly a place you wandered. Every kid in the valley knew the stories. Quicksand slick as soap, coyotes that didn't fear men, old prospectors who swore the rocks moved when you weren't looking. Amos had rules, and rule number 1 was, don't go past the fence alone. But desperation has a way of turning rule-breaking into common sense. Without Bessie, there'd be no sale, no cash, no bargaining chip when the banksman came tapping on their door. So Clementine slipped out into the crisp morning, looking for a pig and walking straight into the teeth of a mystery. She found the tracks first, 2 deep crescents pressed into damp soil, wild and deliberate. Bessie had pushed farther than usual, the prints angling toward the rocks. The hills there rose in ribs, gray and folded, a maze of thorn and shale. The air smelled like iron and sage. The sun was still low, a pale coin trying to warm this box of stone. She ducked under scrub, feeling the thorns pick stitches in her dress, and heard it. A sound you don't expect from a hog at all. A low human sound. Pain given voice. I don't know about you, but there are noises that freeze the marrow before your brain has a vote. Her feet stopped. Her breath went shallow. For a second she saw herself turning around, confessing to her father later that she lost the hog, apologizing as if sorry were a currency you could trade for time. But then she pictured the bank's date, and you can't apologize to a piece of paper. She pushed on. There, between a tumble of boulders, a natural cave had formed, 3 stones leaning against a 4th like the bones of a fallen giant. Bessie stood at the mouth, snuffling with the dumb curiosity that saves and sinks a farm in equal measure. Clementine edged in sideways, one hand out to keep the pig from stepping on her toes, and saw him. A man, maybe 30, maybe 40. It's hard to tell when a face is pale as winter clay and sweat slicks the hair to the brow. His shirt was torn, his ribs mapped in bruises. Blood had dried in his beard like rust. He clutched a small leather pouch to his chest as if it were a child he meant to protect with his last breath. When his eyes opened, they were the tired, glassy kind you see on men who have been running longer than their legs were built to run. "Please," he said. The word came raw, barely a thread. "Don't tell anyone you found me. There are choices that split you. Fear and mercy pulling in opposite directions like 2 teams at a county fair." Clementine felt both. Her father had lectured her 100 times about strangers in the hills. You don't survive long out here without sorting friend from threat quickly. And the rule of thumb is that fear keeps you fed. But mercy has a sound of its own. And it was in the way this man couldn't quite lift his head. "What happened?" she whispered. The cave held the whisper like a secret. "Man," he said, "they were chasing me. They wanted what I found." His fingers tightened on the pouch. Had to hide. Had to make it here. Bessie bumped the pouch with her snout, as if to say, "Open it already." Clementine drew her hand back on instinct, and the man, there was a name in his eyes before he said it, blinked hard and offered it, like he knew he owed her one truth before asking for another. Boone Carter. Used to work for the railroad. Now, the railroad in those days was a rumor and a promise at the same time.
Folks in the valley had heard talk. Men in suits in town, maps unrolled on counters, a line drawn west like a knife. For families like the Rosses, those maps felt like a sermon spoken in another language. You hear the cadence, you catch the urgency, but the meaning slides off. Land value, right of way, fair compensation. Words like that were church bells ringing somewhere you couldn't find. Boone nodded at the pouch. Proof, he said. More than talk. They've been buying land through false names, paying broken prices, telling folks they're doing them a favor. He coughed. The sound turned him gray. Your place, it's not worthless. Clementine actually laughed, one small, breathy sound that sounded ridiculous in a cave 6 miles from the edge of anything. Mister, she said, our soil is so mean it blunts a shovel. The bank says the bank is part of the story, he cut in with a sharpness that told her how much strength he still had. Not the whole story. There's a line coming, right through this valley, and the company that wants it is counting on folks not knowing what their own ground is worth.
Maybe you know that feeling. You wake up feeling your life as a small thing, a private struggle, and then suddenly you're standing in a diagram. People with plans, money finding the easiest path, your name sitting in a ledger you've never seen. Clementine felt the cave tilt. She looked at Bessie. The pig blew out a bored breath as if to say, you wanted scraps, you found a feast. Voices rose on the wind then. Men's voices, angry, fanned out, moving slow. Clementine's heart jumped to her mouth. The cave's mouth was a narrow frame of daylight, and in the dirt just outside she could see it, horse tracks, fresh enough to glisten around the edges. Boone saw them too. He reached for her wrist, his grip a ghost of a grip. Please, he said, cake this. He eased the pouch toward her. Hide it. Don't show anyone until you're sure, not even your father. That last part stung, and she flinched. My father? He's a good man. I don't doubt it, Boone said, but good men trust the wrong men, and the wrong men know how to smile. The railroad has eyes in every pew and hands in every pocket. You don't have time to sort saints from sinners right now. You have time to hide this and walk out like you were only chasing your hog. Sometimes courage looks like a charge. Sometimes it looks like closing your hand around something that scares you. Clementine tucked the pouch inside the bodice of her dress. It sat hot against her ribs, a second heartbeat. She put a hand on Bessie's rope. I'll come back tonight. Food, water, bandages. Boone shut his eyes, as if the promise itself was a balm. Trust no one completely, he added, voice thinner than paper. Not now. She led Bessie out into the morning that suddenly seemed too bright, and there he was at the base of the rocks, Amos Ross, jaw set, 2 men flanking him. The one on the left she knew as Mr. Harrison, the general store's owner, a man with a tidy ledger and eyes that recorded what they lent you better than the ink ever could. The other was a stranger with a lawman's stance, but no badge she could see. There you are, Amos called, and relief and anger braided in his voice like wire. Girl, what were you thinking? Bessie broke the fence. Clementine kept her voice small and ordinary. Harrison stepped forward. We're looking for someone, he said, and he studied her face like he'd find footprints there. A dangerous man. Stole documents from honest businessmen. If you saw anything unusual in those rocks, you should say so now. Now, here's where the story could have snapped clean in half. Clementine could have told the truth right then and there and handed a bleeding man over to luck. She could have lied poorly and been matched word for word by someone who did it for a living. But sometimes the right lie, told for the right reason, is a bridge you build between 2 cliffs. Clementine drew a breath and let fear do the acting for her.
I saw tracks, she said. Fresh. 3, maybe 4 horses. Circling, then heading north toward the ridge. Amos's eyes cut to her. A father knows the weather of his child's voice. Harrison's chin tilted, hawk-like. North, he repeated. You're certain? Yes, sir, she said, and she forced her gaze to hold steady. North. The stranger looked to Harrison. We're losing daylight, he said. If there are riders, they'll have a lead. Harrison waited. Men like him are always weighing, always calculating what the room will bear. Then he nodded. We'll sweep the North Ridge, he said, tossing a look to Amos that was meant to be friendly and landed as a warning. Keep your family close, Mr. Ross. There are dangerous people about. When they rode away, dust hung in the air like a curtain. Amos didn't move. He kept his eyes on the ridge for a long moment, then shifted them to his daughter. It is a hard thing, that look. Love and suspicion rubbing shoulders. Clem, he said quietly, you want to try that again? She almost broke. Fear and guilt put splinters in the same spot. But something else rose in her like a tide. Trust. The kind that isn't blind. The kind that is chosen. She reached inside her dress and took the pouch out. The leather felt older than both of them, and for a second she saw her father as a young man, stubborn and hopeful in equal measure, and wondered how many times life had asked him to choose a road with no signpost. She set the pouch in his hands. There's a man hurt in the rocks. His name is Boone Carter. He worked for the railroad. He says they've been buying folks out with fake names and fake kindness. He says our land isn't worthless. Amos opened the pouch the way a man opens a book he never thought he'd own. Inside were maps, letters, lists of parcels, signatures that repeated in different hands like a magician's trick. I swear the cave seemed to press in again, even though they were standing in open air. Amos's face changed while he read. Confusion to anger to a quiet sort of steel. Where is he? He asked. In the cave, she said, bleeding and trying not to let the world notice. Amos didn't preach at her about lies or fences. He didn't say he was proud of her either. That wasn't his way. He just closed the pouch, slid it under his coat, and said, "Let's go."
They moved like ghosts through the rocks, every step a challenge not to kick shale into song. Boone was where she'd left him, only grayer. Amos worked fast. Water, a strip of cotton around the ribs, a shoulder lifted with the gentleness you don't see until it's needed. The three of them made a strange caravan. Farmer shouldering a man who once worked for the machine that could grind him up, a teenage girl leading a pig who thought all of this was a new kind of breakfast. They reached the house without a witness, save an old barn cat who knew better than to gossip. They cleaned and stitched and fed. Boone slept like a man slipping above and below the surface of a deep lake. When he woke, late afternoon had turned gold. He told them more, about meetings in back rooms, about shell companies building a paper maze, about a plan so tidy it would have snapped shut on this valley like a trap, if not for one man's conscience and one girl's stubborn hog. Anyone who refused to sell, he said, would find themselves face to face with words like eminent domain. That phrase is a boot with a buckle. It shines in the sun, but it'll step on you just the same. What do we do? Clementine asked. We can't keep this a secret forever. No, Amos said, and the word carried weight like a beam. We don't keep it, we share it. Carefully. That night and the nights that followed saw Amos driving his wagon by lantern light, knocking softly on neighbors' doors, the Millers, the Crawfords, the Johnsons, men and women who had worked their acres until their hands learned the land like a hymn. He didn't fan a fire, he passed paper. He showed a map's line and told a simple truth. You've been told your ground is a burden. It is not. It is a treasure, and someone's been planning to take it cheap. You ever watched a town wake up? Not in the morning sense, in the sense where people who thought they were alone suddenly realize their struggle rhymes with their neighbors. Anger, yes, but also a kind of relief, like a knot in the shoulder finally giving way. By week's end, there was a coalition, though nobody used that word. There were kitchen tables with plans drawn in pencil. There were men who weren't men of letters learning how letters work. And there was Boone, pale but steady, writing down everything he could recall in a hand that trembled but did not stop. Meanwhile, Harrison and his riders kept disappearing toward the North Ridge like hounds chasing a scent Clementine had bottled out of thin air. I'm not saying she saved the valley with a lie. I'm saying her lie bought time, and time is the most valuable thing in a fight like this. There came a day when the valley grew quiet in that particular way that means the noise has moved to town. Amos hitched the wagon. Boone climbed in slow, every step in negotiation with his ribs. They drove to the courthouse, where a judge whose eyes had seen a dozen schemes and a dozen more excuses sat behind a desk that had suffered all of them. Boone swore an oath with a voice that carried and laid the bones of the railroad's trick on polished wood. Papers became evidence, maps became testimony, names became indictments. I won't pretend it was clean. Powerful people get slippery when cornered. But something happens when the truth is too well documented to dodge. Men Harrison answered to found themselves answering to the law. Some were fined, some were led away, and the company's representatives learned a new phrase they hadn't prepared to use: fair market value.
Back in the valley, independent surveyors, men who worked for no one but the numbers, walked the boundaries with chains and notebooks. Stakes went into the earth where the new line would run, and for the first time those stakes felt like a deal rather than a threat. Families got offers that matched the worth of their acres, not as wasteland, but as the path of the future. Folks who had already sold for pennies got the difference made up, and I wish you could have seen the look on Mrs. Miller's face when a check, twice what she owed the bank, landed on her kitchen table like a miracle, wearing a dollar sign. And the Ross place? Let's just say the date on the bank's paper came and went, and the only thing tapped at their door was the polite knock of a surveyor asking permission to place a marker near the creek. Amos paid what they owed. There was money left over, not the kind that turns you into another person, but the kind that makes you sleep through the night and wake to the smell of coffee without fear riding shotgun. One evening, when the sun folded itself behind the ridge and the sky wore that bruised color you only get after a hard day ends well, Clementine leaned on the fence and watched Bessie root with contentment only pigs and babies truly master. She thought about how many things had to line up: a broken slat, a pig with a taste for adventure, a man with a conscience, a father who chose trust over anger at exactly the right moment. How many times do we miss the thread because we're so busy cursing the mess that led us to it? How many worthless things in our lives are only worthless because someone else told us so? Maybe you felt it. Standing at a fence line, looking out at something you thought was the border of your life, and realizing it's just the edge of a map someone else drew. Maybe there's a pouch in your story, too, some proof tucked against your ribs that the ground you stand on is richer than you were taught to believe. I keep thinking about Boone, about the way his voice cracked on the word please, about how easy it is to say no when danger shows its teeth, and how essential it felt, how human, to say yes instead. We talk big about justice like it's a statue in a square, a thing carved and certain. But out here, justice is sometimes a girl making up horse tracks to buy a bleeding man an hour. It's a father passing a map across a kitchen table. It's a town learning new words so it can speak its worth in a language power understands. Months later, steel would sing through that valley. Trains carve songs no bird can quite imitate. The sound was change itself, and not all change comes gentle. But when the first engine rolled past, folks gathered on porches and slopes, some wiping eyes they would never admit were wet. Not because the future had arrived, futures don't arrive like that, but because the future had learned to knock. As for Harrison, people will tell the story different ways. Some say he packed a bag and left before dawn, that the man who kept every other man's account never thought to tally his own. Others say he stood on the courthouse steps with his jaw clenched, the ledger in his eyes finally closed for lack of ink. I don't much care which version is true. What matters is that men like him were reminded that a valley is not a set of parcels, it's a set of people who, if given a reason, will stand shoulder to shoulder and be counted. And if you're wondering what became of Bessie, because a good story pays its debts, she lived a long, pampered life, fed on table scraps and fame. If you stopped by the Ross place and didn't ask after her, Clementine would have laughed and told you you'd missed the star of the whole adventure. There's a lesson in that. Sometimes the thing we're chasing is the very thing leading us where we need to go. Sometimes the most important journey starts with mending a fence you didn't think was worth fixing. I can't stop asking myself, what's your fence? What's your Bessie? What trouble are you chasing this week that might just be the first step towards saving something larger than you can see from here? Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a receipt you're afraid to look at, or a neighbor you've decided you don't have time for. We're all standing in our own valleys, after all. We all have maps we didn't draw. Clementine would tell you she didn't do anything brave. She just followed a pig, listened to a hurt man, and told the truth to her father. But that's the way courage often feels from the inside, like errands, like chores, like an ordinary morning where you lace your boots and the ground answers back, "Come and see." So, if you remember anything from this, remember a girl at dawn, a father with a steady hand, a man who traded comfort for conscience, and a valley that learned the value of itself. Remember that justice can be patient but doesn't have to be polite. And remember that miracles don't always arrive on a Sunday. Some come squealing through a broken fence at sunrise, kicking up dust, asking you if you're willing to follow. Because sometimes the only way to find the truth is to go where you were told not to go and trust that what looks like trouble might be the trailhead to everything that matters.